Well, our top story at this hour, the British government has presented a policy paper before Parliament that outlines its post-Brexit immigration blueprint, and if early inputs are to be believed, it could mean good news for Indians planning to work in the UK. The British Interior Minister has told members of Parliament that the government plans to remove a cap on the number of work visas issued to Indians.
And fundamental to this will be a new route for skilled workers to ensure that employers can access the talent that they need to compete on the world stage. There will be no cap on numbers and no requirement for the high-skilled workers to undertake a resident labour market test. And there will be a minimum salary threshold.
And the proposal will put European Union and non-European Union residents at par with each other. So far, the immigration system is biased in favor of workers from the European Union. The current system prefers highly skilled workers from outside the European Union and workers of all skill levels from the bloc. So this looks like it's good news for, well, immigrants from India. Finally, the British Parliament may remove that cap for immigrants from India, and which also means that they can work in India in the UK for more than a year. And well, what does Donald Trump like to do early morning? He likes to tweet. And now, of course, he says his country does not want to police the Middle East. His country does not want to spend precious lives in the region. It's time for Americans to come and rebuild. What more, the US president, what more has he said? Well, it's time people fought their own battles. The president also has said that Russia, Iran, Syria are the local enemy of the terror group Islamic State. And therefore, this essentially means it's not his problem anymore. And Daniele Pagani, who's been tracking the details of this story, joins us now, our West Asia Bureau Chief. And Daniele, so Trump has confounded his own Republicans, and it shows, of course, little nuanced consideration, on how this fight will continue even if the US leaves. And that vacuum, who's going to fill that? That's the big question. Will the ISIS come back into large swaths of Syria, or whether this gives a massive opportunity for the Russians to come back?
This is definitely the question on the ground, and I am afraid that also many of the military advisors within the Pentagon do not know how to answer this question. This is an opportunity for the Russians to fill that space, but remember also that conducting a ground offensive, conducting the same offensive that the American troops were conducting, joined to the Kurdish, Arab, Syrian Democratic Forces, is tremendously expensive in terms of money and in terms of soldiers. So Russians always hesitated to send their own troops on the ground, official own troops on the ground, at the forefront of an offensive like the one that the Kurds are right now battling there. If this is a possibility that the Islamic State would come back, well, yes, this is definitely a possibility. We are given to understand as of now that anyway the United States-led coalition will continue providing air support to the advance of the Syrian Democratic Forces, which means that anyway there will still be a military role there for the United States of America. Certainly the Islamic State could benefit out of this. The military problem is not the only problem when it comes to the Islamic State. The United States, together with other coalition partners, should now focus to rebuild large swathes of Iraq which have been destroyed during their own anti-Islamic State offensive, if they really want the Islamic State not to come back.
Absolutely, Daniele. Thanks very much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts about what this could mean for Syria and, of course, for the rest of the world as well. Now, in an exclusive interview with WION's Ramesh Ramachandran in June last year, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad talked about the role of the West, particularly Americans, in the Syrian war. Listen in.
Mr. President, you mentioned the names of some terrorist groups. You mentioned the names of some countries, including Saudi Arabia and other countries. But if I were to ask you, Mr. President, who or what do you blame for the crisis in Syria today?
If I want to be objective, we always say that if you don't have your own, let's say, defects in your society, in your country, the external factor would be minimal. So we always talk about our mistakes or our loopholes or defects. But at the end, we didn't bring the terrorists, we didn't support the terrorists, we didn't support this ideology. Mainly who started this conflict was Qatar, under the supervision and the endorsement of the Western countries, mainly France and UK at the very beginning. But when you talk about France and UK, they wouldn't do something without the permission of the United States. We all know that the real mentor is the United States, but they allow others to play different roles. So if you want to blame about who supported the terrorists and who started this bloodletting and bloodshedding in Syria, was the West and Qatar, and later Saudi Arabia, 1 year later, joined the same effort. And of course Turkey, we wouldn't forget Turkey, who was the main player with the terrorists in Syria from the very, very beginning.